Today, we're going to talk about web APIs, and we're going to create a web API in .NET Core, and we are going to use SQL Server, and then we're going to kind of tie that together with App Builder, and we're going to use a little bit of code. This webinar is like 30 minutes, I think. It's a lot to cover in 30 minutes, so I'm going to be going fast, but the good news is you're going to get everything, and then I have some more. So we will make sure stuff is there. So today's host, myself, Brian, we've got many people on the chat line today. So if you have questions, use the chat, send to all attendees, or use the Q&A. You can do either one. Anything that pops up, we try to do live, but for the most part, you've got the A team on the chat line, and we are going to answer every single question. We got Brian, we got Zdravko, who leads the product team. You got Jesse, you got JJ on the line, and then there's folks from the product team that are also on the line as attendees. So if you see someone answer your question, they probably know what they're doing. So today, what we're going to do is a web API. Kind of talk about this a little bit. We're going to create an app in Blazor, or actually, we're going to create an app in an App Builder, and then we're going to generate that code in Blazor. Then we're going to consume our web API. And today it's going to be all read-only in terms of what we do in Blazor. We've got a bunch of different webinars coming up. So this is like a series of webinars on CRUD and web APIs. So through October and probably even into November and December, I'm going to do more webinars on this stuff. This has been like an overwhelming request from people because they're coming from like rich client, not familiar with some of this tech. So these are like literally 100 level, maybe 200 level sessions. And of course, for 300 level, that's when we have Brian Lagunas come in and do that. And we might do something cool near the end of the year, which is Brian did some work on the social login for xl2json.io, where you can use the Google login, and that will authenticate to a back end and then say, yeah, this guy has files and all that. So I asked him the other day if he could do a webinar on that, and he thought it might be a neat idea. If you think that is cool, let us know in the chat. So today we're going to do a CRUD API, and you're going to see how to build a CRUD API in a minimal .NET 6 API and consume in a Blazor app with a little master detail. In 2 days, we're doing a webinar with another product that we ship called Reveal, but it's going to be using data visualizations and dashboards in Blazor with an app built in App Builder. So even if you don't care about Reveal, which is an embedded BI SDK, you should still come to that webinar. Go to our website, infragistics.com webinars, and go to that webinar because it's going to be Blazor. It's going to be web API. It's going to be all the same stuff, just a little bit different. September 13th, we're going to do a full CRUD client with web API in Angular. So we're going to build something in App Builder. We're going to connect to our CRUD web API, and then we're going to take it over to Visual Studio Code, and we're going to finish all of the code there to do updates, deletes, and creates within the grid, because the grid, you can do inline data entry. September 27th, we're going to probably build on what we do today, and we're going to do CRUD data entry forms with pop-up dialogues and all these other things. You have a Blazor app and you've got some data and you want to do editing, and you're going to see kind of what I'm talking about today, but maybe you do a pop-up dialogue, or maybe it's a master detail and there's a save button and a cancel button and a delete button. And how does that all get wired up? And then October 11th, we're doing Blazor Grid CRUD plus pop-up in App Builder. So all of these are going to showcase App Builder, but it's more on this kind of business data stuff that you all need to do. October 11th will be interesting as well, because we sort of have this updated version of our Blazor Grid coming out, which I think you'll be pretty excited to see. So we're going to continue to improve across everything we do here. And when I do the same webinar, maybe in Q1 2023, you won't have to write any code. So we're in the process now of implementing all of this code auto-magically for you in App Builder. And we're getting to the point where you don't have to write any of this code eventually. So our goal this year is to support full CRUD in the grid in App Builder, and then early next year have full form building and all this other stuff. So, all these things are coming down to you. And oh, by the way, there's already questions I see. Yes, you will get a recording of this, and as well as I'm going to post the docs so you can copy paste all the code as well that I'm going to show today, because I'm going to be copy pasting some of it as well. So when we talk about App Builder, we went over these numbers last time, but 39% of you all respond to our surveys saying that you spend all this time working with HTML, CSS. Even today, you're going to see me whip together this simple UI in App Builder that I'm going to just use in Visual Studio. So it's super easy to do this stuff with a WYSIWYG. And because most of us don't have designers, 3 out of 4 of us don't have designers, you need a tool like App Builder to supplement all of this stuff you're doing. In fact, Brian was on a call over the last week with 2 customers, and they have hundreds of screens to redo. So that's fine. Of course, your hand coding might be perfect, and we all agree with that. Doing something handcrafted is usually going to have that little tweak that's a little bit better. But if we can give you something that is 95% good enough, then you should use it and save that time to do something else. It's all about time saving. So we're going to go right into the demo. This is probably going to take about 30 minutes total. So we're going to go afternoon. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to create a minimal API in .NET 6. We're going to connect that web API to App Builder. I'm going to create a client UI in App Builder, and then we're going to modify the client UI to do a little bit of master detail. So it's going to be pretty exciting. So let us start. So we can just start straight away. What I want to show you here is actually a couple things. I'm going to show you, we did an App Builder release last night. So App Builder is released iteratively. Like we're releasing every 2 weeks, updated features, every 4 weeks, updated features. So you're always getting new stuff. So there's a bunch of stuff that we released or updated and released yesterday, and we are going to continue to do this. Of course, and Zdravko will paste this into the chat. All of this is always publicly available on GitHub. Everything Infragistics does with Ignite UI and App Builder is public. So you don't have to go guessing. Yeah, I have a blog on our website that talks about our roadmap, but you can also just go to GitHub and look at our going down the road section, and you can see, oh yeah, master detail, doc manager, CRUD, all this good stuff. And then what we're doing in the current iteration. So you're always up to date. We are not trying to hide anything ever. And if I go up to Ignite UI, you can see we do this for all of our products. You can jump to everything. So it looks like if I go to Ignite UI for Angular here, here's the Angular. Oh, gee, what's the roadmap for Angular? Cool. Just click on roadmap and you can see what's due, what's going down the road, and what we shipped in the previous milestone. And then, of course, the big thing for everyone here should be making sure you read the change log. If you upgrade and something doesn't work, go to the change log and you can see like every single detail, every breaking change, all this stuff, constant improvement. All right, so here's what we're going to do today. I already have a SQL database set up. This SQL database is super simple. What it's doing is has a table called features and products. And all we're doing here is we've got a few different fields. We've got some primary key fields. We've got a product field, title, description, etc. As we go through our series of sessions here, we are going to continue to add a little bit more complexity to the samples, right? So for this demo, what I wanted to do was something relatively simple, and then we're going to build on it. The other thing that I wanted to show here is that after this webinar, I'm going to finish this up today, but this has all of the steps and all of the copy paste for you to do exactly what I'm doing today. So if you'd like to watch videos and do that, great. You can rewatch the webinar. If you just want to go and find some stuff that I'm actually going to implement, you can just copy paste this. So this will be in the email that gets sent out. The reason it's not ready yet is you can see there's some words missing here, but also I got to add the database stuff in there so you can use the database. So that'll be up there for you. So let's go ahead and open up Visual Studio. And what I'm going to do is create a new project. It's an ASP.NET Core Web API. And we're going to call this guy Features API. Now, Features API, there's two things we can do here. If you are a savvy web developer like Zdravko is and like Brian is, what they're going to do is they're going to use MVC controllers for all of their CRUD functions and CRUD operations. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use minimal APIs. Now, the interesting thing is this used to be a checkbox that said use minimal APIs. Now the check is use controllers. So, you know, it's really up to you. And the thing about using controllers is that each method that you're going to see today is actually a separate function that you can probably do more stuff in, and it can be way more organized. Today, you're going to see all the code in a single file, and that's what minimal APIs do. They give you everything in your program.cs, and really that's where you end up doing all of your work. So what we have to do here is a few things to get our project going. We're going to use Entity Framework, and what we're going to do to get our database that you saw into this API is we're going to use the Entity Framework tools. And so you're going to learn how to do all this stuff. If I just run this guy right now, I'll run Features API and you'll be able to see what this is doing. And in fact, the default now for .NET 6 is to use Swagger. So no matter what APIs we add, we are going to have whatever happens to be there. And there is an HTTP GET that exists. It's a demo for the weather forecast. And I'll click try it out. I'll click execute, and this executed my weather forecast. So if you want to know where that's at, you go to program.cs, and here you've got an app.mapget. That was our weather forecast API, and it did a little bit of code here, and basically that's it. So what we're going to do, we're going to delete all this because we don't need it, and we're going to come back to program CS in a second. So that's sort of this stub sort of sample stuff that Microsoft includes. First thing we're going to do is right click on our project, and we're going to go to manage NuGet packages. The first thing is I noticed there's an updated Swagger package and NuGet. So I'm going to update my project with this. So I'll accept that. Then I'm going to go click browse. And what we need to do is install a few things for Entity Framework to work. So the first thing is Microsoft.Entity Framework Core. And I'm going to use the latest stable, and I'm going to click install. And all these dialogues, essentially you are just selecting OK, install, doesn't matter. Since we're using SQL Server, we want to install SQL Server, same thing. And then finally, we want to use Entity Framework Core.design, and we're going to click install. And OK, I accept. Now here we've got these Entity Framework Core tools. We're going to install these Entity Framework Core tools, which is a CLI for Entity Framework from the package manager. So you can see here, it's sort of fired up the package manager console. If this is not here, go to View, Other Windows, Package Manager Console, and this will open up. And what this does is you need to change the directory to your features API directory for what we're going to do here. And it's a little command line. So what we want to do is install the CLI for these .NET tools. And this is essentially everything that I'm going to show you here is so well documented that when you're trying to scaffold or do your object first database, it doesn't really matter. The CLI does all this stuff for you through simple commands. And this content, which I will copy in and paste into the chat, is super, super useful. So let me paste this into everyone because this is what I'm going to be using. But you can see it gives you all the commands, all the shortcuts, all this stuff. And we're going to be doing, we're going to be creating DB context, and we're going to be using Scaffold to actually scaffold all of our classes that we need to generate this stuff. All right, so in order to install this, and I already have it installed, it's actually going, this is going to error out, but I am going to show you even with the error. It's really important that if you are using a bunch of different NuGet sources like I am, that you have this -- ignore failed sources at the end of it. So what you're doing is saying .NET tool install. What do I want to install? I want to install .NET EF tool, and I'm going to hit enter. And what this does, it gives an error. It says, hey, this is already installed. If you want to, uninstall, it's the same thing. You just change the word install to uninstall, and now we can go install it again. And when it does say this ignored failed sources, what ends up happening here is, like at Infragistics, we use an internal NuGet feed. We have external NuGet feeds. I mean, I have like 4 or 5 NuGet feeds. And so you can see here in package source, like where they all are. Even if you specify the one to use, I was still getting an error. So make sure that you do that. Now, the next thing is, if you type in here .NET EF, you'll see that, okay, this actually did install and we're good to go. So I'm happy with that. So now the next thing we need to do is actually scaffold this. But in order to scaffold this, it needs to know where to go. So I'm going to manage my user secrets. And in my user secrets here, I want to add my connection strings. And connection strings is where you're going to put where you connect to data. Using user secrets means that this is stored locally on your hard drive. And when you deploy this to Azure, nothing in user secrets will get deployed. You can also just use app settings, but then when you deploy this, all of your connection string info is there. So there'll be a whole nother webinar on using Azure Key Vault and stuff like that, because it's how you would actually secure your data. So I'm going to say we have a local connection here, and our local connection is, and this is just key value pairs, and our server equals / SQL Express. Our database equals features, which is what you saw, and then trusted _ connection equals true. So that's all we got to do here. And I'm typing a little bit of code here, but I'm going to do a lot of copy paste just in because of time, just to get this thing going for you. So now I've got to say, all right, .NET Tools, go ahead and scaffold all my stuff. So I'm going to copy this guy and paste it into the command line here, and we'll look at what this actually says. And I know it's kind of small. I don't know if I can make this guy any bigger. If I go to 200. Oh yeah, I sure can. Cool. Where did it go? Oh, there it is. It made it go on 2 lines. So I'm saying .NET EF, create a DB context, scaffold. What do I want to scaffold? I want to scaffold connection strings, local connection, using SQL Server, stick my output into a folder here called models. And I'm putting -- force because -- force is like a reminder to me to overwrite whatever's there. So because this is scaffolding, I'm not modifying any of this code. I'm just always going to overwrite it if I change something in my database. And that's all I need to do. So doesn't reference. Oh, so this is another thing I ran into. Notice how it says it doesn't reference Entity Framework Core Design. I guess there's something in Entity Framework Core Design that makes you need to build your project before it sees it. So now if I do this, it'll say build succeeded, like so, and you'll see my models folder. So let's go back down to 100% and let's put this guy here. We can actually just minimize him. So what do I have? I've got my feature class. I've got my product class. I've got my view, which is a join on my product and features. And then I've got the whole DB context here. So the features context, DB context, and all of the objects that I'm going to populate to use in my web API. So how do we do this? Let's go to program.cs. Now there's a couple things you got to get going here to set up. The first thing is, before you do your builder.build, you need to get your SQL connection set up, and you need to set a CORS policy, because we're going to be doing all this locally. So in my toolbox, I've got a couple handy things here that we're just going to drag and drop. So the first thing is we're adding the DB context to the context of this app based on the features context, which we just added here, which is going to get the data from local connection using SQL Server. So essentially, these are just these Lambda expressions saying, hey, I need this features context using these options. And I want to be able to use features context across whatever I need in the application. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, put a using statement here so that shows up. And then for the SQL Server, we're going to do the same thing. That's using Entity Framework Core. Now those things are lit up and working fine. And then the next thing we need to do is we need to add that CORS policy. Now the CORS policy is going to allow us to run this app locally and access it from App Builder and our local apps. We do this all the time, like in every demo, and especially the reveal demos. And then all you do is you set this up. And then when you say, if it is development, you're going to say app.useCORS. And then in use CORS, you're going to pass it the name of the CORS policy that you created. And in this case, it's allow all. So now I'm going to say use CORS allow all. So now I can access all of this locally. Now, all we have to do now is call the database and return these things to the caller. And we use that with the app object. And we have these prefixes for map. So you've got map get for an HTTP get, map post for a post, map put for HTTP post, and map delete for an HTTP delete. And it's just sort of a repeating pattern. So whether you have 30 tables, 100 tables in your product, or 1 or 2 like we have, it is just doing a get, post, put, or delete. And to show you how this works, if you just do sort of an empty, map get on this guy, and we'll just say, hey, I want to show something special like hello world. Whoops. And the other thing that you'll see here as well is that a lot of the code complete happens for you. So sometimes you don't even have to think. So I'm saying app map get, go to the default URL and paste out a hello world. So I save this guy and I run it. Our Swagger UI will come up again. It won't have the weather forecast. It'll have my thing, say, try it out, execute. In there, I've got my hello world. But what we want to do is we actually want to get some data. So I'm going to say app.mapGet. And when I map get, we're going to call this API our features API. And some people that are like hardcore and have been doing this for a while, they put the prefix API before the backslash. So it would be API/features. I don't do that. It's really up to you, how you actually structure this. So we're going to do an asynchronous call, and we're going to use that features context that we created earlier. And we're going to call that context. So we want to use this variable called context. And in this, in its simplest form, is just going to go call the function that's in feature context.cs, which is context. And it's going to be our view because I want to return everything. And all this stuff comes up in my autocomplete. And then all of the returns to the caller are going to be a to-list async like so. And that's pretty much it. That's all we need to do here is I'm saying, here's a features API, and I'm going to make this lowercase, use the features context, have a variable called context. What do I want to do with context? I want to do VW features to-list async. Now, when you run this, you will see our features, and we'll click try it out. We'll click execute. We'll scroll down a bit, and you'll see here that all of my features came across from the database. It's literally that simple. So now we're going to kind of rifle through the rest of these. I'm going to add 4 more functions here. This one's going to be a little bit different. This app map get is going to accept a variable called feature ID. So the difference here is in the previous function, we said feature context, but I'm going to pass a variable in the URL. So I want to say, grab this number and use this ID somewhere. And instead of just returning everything, what I'm going to do is have this where clause and say, do a find and give me the one where the feature ID equals this ID from the context, and then return that feature. So now when we run this, I've got basically the 2 most important things I need for a master detail. I'm getting my whole master, and then here I have my detail. And there you go. So here you can see that this is what it actually called. If I copy this and I paste this right in, you're going to see I got feature ID 3. If I change this to 99, I'll get an empty body coming back. Speaking of body, this is where you may sway a little bit differently from using the straight up way of using just an entity framework object versus doing a little bit of custom code yourself. So I was doing all of my code with just Entity Framework, and I let Entity Framework do all the heavy lifting. So then Brian was doing a little code review on me, and he said, hey, when you do a post or a put, what you should be doing is not just accepting the feature context or the whatever the body is from Entity Framework, which is what I was doing. So I was just saying context right here, features.add. What do I want to add? I want to add this feature that's coming across as an object in the URL. And then I would save this. Brian said, well, if you want more control and you want to avoid like any bugs, and kind of this came up because I was running into a little bit of an issue. He said, what you want to do is use from body and then handle each individual property setting yourself. So what essentially we're doing here is we're getting the context, we're getting this feature object, which of course, well, in this case, it's going to be this feature object, and I'm setting each field individually versus taking the entire state of the body and just applying it, right? So that's where you get a little bit of control. And then you would also make a minor change on the client side. And then here you're doing the same thing. You're doing an add async, save changes, etc. And I want to add 2 more before we test this again, and you'll see kind of where this is going. I'm going to paste in the put, and the put is similar to the get by the ID, where I am saying, go find this feature. If it exists, then we want to go ahead and we want to set the properties on that feature. We want to save changes. And then for each one of these, we're returning back to the caller the object that's been hydrated and added. So we're just going to add a delete here, and then we'll go test this whole thing out. So now I've got app.map delete. What do I want to delete? Well, features API, I want to delete this ID that's getting passed in here, just like my get. So I'm doing checking to make sure that I actually have an ID, or else I return results.not found. Otherwise, go ahead and remove this object from the database, save the changes, and then do a return. So hopefully you can see by looking at this code, and keep in mind, you're going to have all this to copy paste and all the source code, is that these are just repeatable patterns. So if I had 20 tables, I would repeat this 20 times. If we go to the app that I show a lot of here, let me open up Visual Studio. And if we go to the Northwind Cloud app, Northwind Cloud, I used Entity Framework Power Tools to create all of my entity objects, but you can see, you know, the Northwind database has a bunch of tables, stored procedures, views. So there's a ton of app.map gets for each object. And literally that's what you would be doing. And it's the same concept. I've got my models here. So each table has a model, and none of this, it was all auto-generated. And then here, if I go to my DB context, all of the objects that get hydrated and I use and I pass around, all the code and all the CRUD code is generated for me. So yeah, when we talk about do you use controllers or do you use program.cs with a minimal API, this could get a little dicey if you have like 100 tables in your product. Maybe, you know, I think we had a call to the customer this week. They probably have 300 tables. I mean, it's a massive application, hundreds of screens, and we hear this all the time. So let's go ahead and run this guy. And you can see Swagger does a beautiful job of telling me, hey, this API has a few features here. So let's try them all out. We got our get features. This is getting these from the database, right? So I've got product ID, feature ID 1, 3, 4, etc. Now let's do a post. So let's go ahead and try this out. So an HTTP post is actually going to add a new record, right? So let's say this is product ID number 2. And since this is live webinar, let's call it live webinar. And this is all just garbage data, of course, live description. And the requester email is live@email.com. And that's it. Feature ID will get populated. It's an identity field, and date added is going to get populated for me. So I go ahead and I hit execute, and bam, feature ID 15 was added. So let's do this. Let's go ahead and get rid of this guy. and we are going to say live webinar 2, and let's execute. And it's like, oh man, look at that. An error occurred. Cannot insert the value null into requester email DBO features. Column does not allow null, insert fail. So if we go back here and we go to our post, which is this guy here, you'll notice we're like missing something here, something called error handling, which I'm not going to add, but you have this results dot. So results dot gives you a bunch of things that then you can return custom errors back to the caller. So you want to make sure you do error handling in your production application. So let's do a put. So we had, I think it was feature ID 12. So let's go ahead and click try it out. Feature ID number 12. And we'll just leave all the defaults there, which is fine. We'll execute. And feature 12 was not found. Maybe it was feature 15. Execute. There we go. Now feature 15 is updated. But that one actually had errors. Remember when it said not found? When we look at this and we did our post, the feature ID was not found. So sort of this results dot not found. And now let's go to get feature by ID. We'll do the same one. Let's do 15, execute. And wait, what just happened here? Feature ID 15, execute. What happened to feature ID 15? Let's go back up here and let's see what happened to feature ID 15. Oh, there is no feature ID 15 because it was not found, of course. Sorry about that. So let's change this to feature ID 3, and we're going to update product ID to 5, and we'll just leave the rest there. We'll execute, and then now we've got feature ID 3 is updated, and then, or that was the get. So let's do 3, sorry, execute, and there's my feature ID 3. And now let's do a delete. Let's try it out. We'll do feature ID 3. We'll execute. Feature ID 3 was deleted. And if I go back and we do an execute on our get all, you'll see feature ID 3 is essentially gone from our list. So that's it. That's all you need to do. You've now created your first web API. So how do we actually consume this now? You know, what are the next steps? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my web browser here, and I'm going to open up App Builder. So the key thing here is you'll notice that in every demo I've done, I've said, hey, App Builder supports Swagger now. So I'm going to grab my Swagger API URL, and I'm going to go to App Builder. I'm going to sign in, and let us get to App Builder. And this is my workbench. Welcome to App Builder. I'm going to do a new application, and I'm going to do this sort of nav plus content view where there's some buttons across the top. And I'm going to customize that in a minute. But first, I want to go to my data source here. And I'm going to delete my test from earlier. And in data, I can click the plus sign, REST API. I'm going to call this features. That's the name of my data source. I'm going to use Open API. I'm going to paste in this Swagger URL, click done, and then I'm going to configure endpoints. Now, keep in mind, if you were on a webinar 6 months ago, you couldn't do this. It had to be in the cloud. Now we've enabled this to work on local access. So that's all that use cores, all that other stuff that we did, which is pretty slick. So here, I'm going to send this off. Yep, it got my data. Cool. And then we're going to do a get for feature ID. I'm going to type in 5. I think there was a feature ID 5. Yep, there's a feature ID 5. I'm going to select this guy. So now we've got get all and get by ID. Select data. I'm going to select all the fields on both these guys, and I'm going to click done. Now I've got a features data source that I'm going to use in my app. So let's go to my pages. I'm going to delete view 3. I don't need it. So I'm going to delete the view, and then I'm going to delete the button on the master page. For this view, I'm going to say grid list. And on this page, I'm going to say master detail, right? So we're just kind of showing view 1 and view 2. So in view 1, I'm going to delete this. I'm going to delete this. I'm going to go to my toolbox. I'm going to type in grid. And I'm going to drag the grid onto the screen. We've made updates where we handle auto-filling the area of the container, no matter what size the container is, which is sweet. I'm going to go to data, go to features and select features, and bam, there is my features coming directly from a database through the web API. So I didn't have to write any code for this. It's done for me auto-magically. Next, we want to go to view 2. View 2, I want my screen look a little different. I'm going to click pick layout. I'm going to use the 2-column layout, and I'm going to make this side a little bit smaller. And instead of going to the toolbox, I'm going to hit Control E, and I'm going to search here for the list control. And I want this list control to be bound to the same data, the features data. And I'm going to remove this restriction of 5 records, and I'm going to bind some fields here. So what I want the listing to show is the title, and I want it to show the product. So now I'm just doing data binding here, all right up from my database. Now what I want to do is I want to do a Control E. I'm going to add a title to this guy. And this is going to be feature details. And what I want to do here is make this kind of like, sort of look like a form. And I'm going to go here. And the great thing is I'm not a designer, but I play one when I use App Builder because it does all the work for me. I mean, like literally I'm setting a few margins here and life is good. And I'm going to add an input group. And in my input group, I want to do the same thing. I want to have some padding here on the bottom. Let's do 20 pixels. And for this input group, I want this to also be data bound. Whoops. And you'll notice it started to repeat here, but I'm going to bind it to the selected feature. So the feature / ID. And what I want to show there is the title. And in the placeholder, I'm going to say title of feature, like so. And actually, I want this to have a little bit more padding. So I'm going to do like 40. That looks better. All right, now I'm going to preview this guy. Boom. All right, now I'm done. So I can go here. I can go here. My app builder work is done. Now I need to finish this in Visual Studio Code. So let's go to edit. I'm going to give this a name. It's going to be called Features App. Yeah, I guess Features App sounds good. And Blazor WASM is what I want to do. And I'm going to download the zip file. And let's go ahead, open this guy up, right click, extract all. Extract, it's over here on this other screen. I'm going to open this up in Visual Studio. And this is happening. And I see there's a ton of activity in the chat. Keep it going. There's a ton of Q&A. Keep it going. So, all right, what did this just do? What this did is it launched my app here. So I've got the grid. I've got my master detail. And see what I'm saying? Well, that didn't quite resize like I had hoped. But what I want to do here is when I click this guy, I want this to be populated with that data. And that's all we're going to do. The grid, we're not going to do anything with. In the next webinar, we're going to do all this data entry and then update that through web API calls, the same stuff we just did. But there's just not enough time today. But there is enough time to do a quick master detail here. So there's a couple things we need to change. Because App Builder does not fully support master detail yet, it generated for me all of the classes that I needed, right? And this stuff looks familiar because this is what our web API was using. And it generated all the service calls. Our master detail should be shipped next 4 to 6 weeks. And what I'm showing you now, you won't have to do. So what I want to do is get features ID. We're actually hard coding that 5. If you remember when I was in App Builder, I said 5. What I want to do is say that I'm going to pass this variable and it is of type double. How do I know that? Because it says it right here. Its feature ID is a double. It's an int and it is a 64-bit number and blah, blah, blah. So I don't have to change anything else here. So this is actually good to go. So let's go ahead and run it. And we're going to get an error. And the error is because what's happening here? Well, when we load up that right-hand side, when we do that, want to do this click on the master detail, we are saying just load up that feature ID with the hard-coded value. Well, we actually need to change that. So the way that we do that is we've got our features feature. So here we've got features feature, which is loaded in on the right. So I want to pass it features feature, and I want it to tell it to get the first record from features feature. What first record do I want, or what do I want? I want the feature ID, and I want the value of that feature ID. And that's going to be that variable that we just passed in. So now if I save this guy and oops, we'll run it, then the first record will show up just like it did in App Builder. The only difference is it'll just be the correct first value here. So updated feature 1. So these guys are showing up. Now I just got to add a little bit of code here to respond to this list item click event. So I'm doing this is all Blazor code here. So in this case, we are going to say that we want to have an event called select. Well, how about selected list changed? And this could be really whatever you want. Selected item changed. And in selected item changed, what I want to pass it is the item. So the item is from features feature. So this is that object that's hydrated with all those features. So I've got this item and I want to pass it to selected item changed. And then I have it, that all the properties in that object available to me. And then when I click it, we're going to populate our input control. So here, what I want to do is add a few more inputs. So I'm just going to add like 5 more. And these are going to be the other fields. So we've got title, I've got description. Remember, this is all from my class. And I'm going to say description like so. And this could be product. And we're going to call this guy product, the label product. And this one we will call, I think there is, requester email, right? So who actually asked for this feature? And we'll add requester email like so, make it look good. And then finally, we'll do date added. Notice the autocomplete here is kind of helping me, which is beautiful. All right, so now I've got selected item changed, and this is all I need to do to bring this guy back home. So down here in my little code section, we want to do an asynchronous call, and all this is going to do is actually go back and use the same service call that we're using here to populate exactly what we want. So this was what did I call this guy? Let's just make sure it's right. Selected item changed. And let's pass this to here. And in here, we're going to pass it the features. And what do we want to pass it? The features type, which is something that was automatically generated for us. And we'll just call this guy feature like so. What I'm going to do is just copy this line and paste it because it's the same code, because we're getting the object that was selected. The only difference is here, I said, get the first item. Well, I don't want to get the first item. What I want to get is from this feature object that's coming in, I want to get the .feature ID and pass that, and we'll pass the value over. Now, this is critical. I'm going to hit run, and I want you to see what happens here. So bam, I got my text boxes. Things are looking good. Now I'm going to hit feature 4. Now nothing happened, but I'm going to click it again. Feature 5, click it again. There is this, I don't know, insane feature, I guess, in Blazor where you have to say state has changed, and that will refresh the cache in the data or the method call on what's actually happening. So if you forget state has changed and you're wondering why your data is not showing up, that's why. So now we run this guy, go back, and like magic, we've got this, and this is all happening perfectly from our running web API. We're using get and get by ID. And that's it. That's all you need to do to wire up a SQL Server to a web API over to a Blazor application. So with that, that's all we're going to show today. That was like a lot for one session here. But what I want to do is bring this guy back up And when you get the email, you'll be able to get the recording, the doc, which I showed you, which has all the copy paste code. You can kind of go from there. All right, that's it, guys. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone who helped out on the call. I really appreciate it. And we will see you at the next webinar in our series. Have a great week, everyone.